and we learned how to spell her last name. We supported her in the election, her re-election at the last election, and our votes made a big difference. She's a member of several very powerful committees. She's on the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. She's a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. She's a ranking member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, which has jurisdiction over AFN and Milka. Please help me welcome the Senior Senator, Senator Lisa Murkowski.
Strong leader.
Strong leader.
A leader is
Leadership should be about serving people with that strong foundation.
They're standing up for everybody and not only themselves, so they have to be able to take the time to hear everybody's opinion.
Willing to help somebody without seeking a benefit.
we take a stand for what is right.
A very strong cultural foundation that are learned from their ancestors and from their elders.
Just listen. Just listen more. And if you need to ask questions, just ask it.
They take the time to listen, they don't cut people off.
To be able to identify yourself with your land and your ancestors and just that strong sense of identity, I think it really helps with confidence.
Rehearse in your mind what you're going to say. Never say something and that'll haunt you. If you say something bad, you can't take it back. Once it's out, it's out.
Next generation, I would say that they learn what they see. They learn by examples, and if you're doing good things and the youth see that, they tend to follow.
I think that we need more encouragement for the younger leaders. It took me a lot to open my mind and my thoughts and trying to get my vote out too. And I get all of my encouragement from my grandparents and my parents.
Listening to the elders respectfully. And also there should have integrity and also a lot of love in their heart, because this is very hard. And you just can't do it unless you have love in your heart to do it.
Good afternoon. Lead with love. That's what I learned from Valerie Davidson last week. Lead with love. And what we just shared on the screen were voices from youth, voices from elders talking about leadership. And when we are here in these halls, leadership and what it means and how it defines what we do is part of the task in front of us. This year marks the 10th year that I have served you in the United States Senate. This is a significant anniversary. When you have a 10-year anniversary, it's important to think, it's important to reflect, perhaps do a little bit of soul-searching. And this year I did that soul-searching about what is leadership? Elected officials come to this podium. They come before you here at AFN. And quite honestly, we're accustomed to standing in front of you and taking credit for what we have done, making lots of promises. But rarely do we ask you what you expect from us. Nor do we talk about what leadership means, what it means to you, and what it means to us. This year, as I have traveled around the state, I focused pretty intently on whether Washington is actually connecting with your needs. We're 4,000 miles away here in Fairbanks, in Alaska, all around our state. We're 4,000 miles away from Washington, D.C. Are we connecting with you? I'm asking whether Alaska Native policy is adapting to the challenges that you face, or are we perhaps stuck in a time warp of decades past? And I have some thoughts that I want to share with you today, and I would welcome that input back from you. Now, you may wonder why I'm even asking the question. Why are we talking about leadership? It really began when we had a very powerful keynote back in 2009 delivered by Willie and Elizabeth Hensley. I think many of us remember the power of the words from Willie and most certainly from Liz. For 40 years plus, the relationship between the Alaska Congressional Delegation and our Native community has been defined by the framework of the 1971 Land Claims Settlement. Now, just on Thursday, you heard from Nelson, who pointed out in his keynote address that many of our Alaska Native corporations are as strong as they have ever been. The corporations, we all know, play a very important role in the economic life of our Alaska Native people, in job creation, in advocacy for issues that are absolutely vital. It has been what has defined so much, and that's very, very significant. And it did not happen by accident. It happened because of considerable hard work and dedication. It's the result of strong, strong Native leadership working in partnership with so many, including your Alaska Congressional Delegation. But that is not to diminish the point that Liz made back in her 2009 keynote address. ANCSA has done much. It has done a lot. But it is not the be-all and the end-all of Native policy. And I took those comments to heart. We have great Native institutions in the state of Alaska. But I might suggest today that we have not perhaps paid sufficient attention to empowering the village tribes. If we want to have healthy villages, we need strong tribes. We need strong tribal leaders. And our tribal leaders need a direct line to the congressional delegation so that these village priorities are heard, they're responded to. You can't wait for the tribal leaders to come and see you. You got to get out, you've got to visit with tribal leaders and their people on their turf. Now, you know that I make a great point to get out to the villages every chance that I get. This allows me not only a connection to the people, but a connection to the land. It allows me to really become grounded again in who you are and who I am. These trips to rural Alaska allow me to suffer through some of the really tough stuff that we deal with in Washington, D.C. So thank you for helping me just be anchored again. This summer took me to some great places. I traveled to some fish camps up the Kuskokwim River. I stopped in at Philip Peters Fish Camp. Philip is from Akiachak. And we're standing there on the banks of the river, and Philip asked me a question. He says, "What do you think of my lifestyle?" And he just kind of opened and spread his arms. And it was a little bit of an odd question, because it's not for me to judge Philip's lifestyle. That's for his to determine. But if one understands anything about Alaska, not Alaska as a place, but Alaska more as a state of mind, there's really only one right answer here to Philip's question. And that is to say, I respect your lifestyle, and I admire the sacrifices that you have made. And that is the right answer, and the reason is because it's authentically Alaskan. The history of our state, the history of Alaska doesn't start with statehood. It doesn't start with discovery of oil in Prudhoe Bay. It starts tens of thousands of years ago with your ancestors. The history of Alaska begins with subsistence. For your ancestors, subsistence equaled survival. It was as simple as that. There's no Fred Meyer, there's no Costco, there's no SNAP's benefits. There is no other alternative. Survival required that your ancestors manage the lands, the fish, and the wildlife wisely, appreciating that they occupy a very special place. And they built a lifestyle, actually more than a lifestyle, an enduring culture built around what the Creator has provided. That 10,000-year-old culture is very, very much alive at Philip Peters Fish Camp, and in so many around the state. On that same trip, I went on to visit Anna Hoffman's fish camp. There were lots of kids running around, and they were watching me, and I was watching them. But the lesson of my visit to Anna's fish camp is just how important subsistence is to building values, to building character in our youth. In fish camp, children learn where they come from and where their place in the world is. They learn a thing or two, perhaps about sacrifice and self-reliance, because we all know that fish camp doesn't stop just because it's raining or because the mosquitoes are bad this year. It's family. It's that connection. But I know I'm not telling any of you in this hall today, I'm not telling you something that you don't know. You recognize the educational, the cultural, the moral value of fish camp, as I have learned. But sadly, our public policies, our policies set back in Washington, D.C. do not recognize that. Federal and state subsistence policies should regard fish camp as the foundation which sustains Native culture in all of its dimensions. Because make no mistake about it, subsistence is not just food security, it is cultural security. Instead, the subsistence regulator often regards fish camp and as just one of the many competing users of an often scarce renewable resource. No more important than other users, and all too often even less important. And that, really in a nutshell, explains why the subsistence law is broken here. And that's what motivated me. You'll recall last year at AFN, I made a commitment to you that we were going to hold hearings in Alaska and in Washington, D.C. I was moved to hold the first hearings on subsistence since passage of ANILCA. We held them in the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. It's that committee that has jurisdiction over ANILCA. And we started that this spring with 2 listening sessions. We had one out in Bethel, we had another in Glen Ellen. And these were open mic hearings. This was anybody who wanted to come forward was welcome to do so and invited to give honest conversation. We had our 3rd hearing and the official, more formal, conventional congressional hearing in Capitol Hill this fall. And what I heard at those hearings was candid, it was honest. People spoke from the heart about what subsistence closures mean. In Bethel, they spoke of the pain and of the insult of risking arrest to feed your family, and the pain of trying to explain to your children and your grandchildren why their state, a state that they love, that they respect, and that they defend, why they were being stopped for pursuing their uniquely, indigenously Alaskan tradition. Out in Glen Ellen, the spirit and teachings of Katie John were felt throughout that hearing. I think we recognize that Katie John may have left us, but her life's work is far from done. I heard about the pain of having to deal with conflicting federal and state bureaucrats and the pain of having to deal with trespassers entering native lands from the road system. And in these hearings, we explored the many, quite honestly, irritating aspects of the federal subsistence program. One of the most irritating is the possibility that communities will lose federal subsistence protections because of bureaucratic determinations that they're no longer rural. And we know the community, Saxon, which is just as much a traditional native community as any in the state, but they've already had to suffer this hardship. Sitka, which successfully fought to remain rural several years ago, is once again anxious about losing this status. Even Barrow has often wondered whether it is one economic development opportunity away from losing its rural designation. And none of this is the doing of Congress. And NILCA does not require periodic reviews of rural status, nor did it require the population-based criteria that the Federal Subsistence Board uses to determine rural status. Quite simply, the standards of the Federal Subsistence Board, these standards that it uses to decide whether a community is rural, are ridiculous. In Alaska, rural is not determined by population. It is determined by the character of life in a place. And the character of life in a traditional community does not change based upon whether or not that community gains or loses a few hundred people. So today, I call upon the Federal Subsistence Board to change its ways, change its approach, and I'm going to work with my colleagues in the delegation to achieve what I think is a very necessary change. I've got another problem with the Federal Subsistence Board, and that's the composition of the board. Since the very inception of the Federal Subsistence Board, the voice of subsistence users has been diluted by the sheer number of the federal bureaucrats that seem to own their seats on the board. At one time, it was one subsistence user to every 5 bureaucrats. Now, it's 5 bureaucrats and 3 subsistence users. So we're improving, but it's not a solution here. We can and we will do better. If you want to change the culture of the Federal Subsistence Board, you need to change the faces. Not just for the sake of changing the faces, but because increasing diversity on the Federal Subsistence Board will change that conversation. That's important. Long before there ever was a Federal Subsistence Board, Native leaders relied on traditional knowledge to regulate subsistence taking. And they did pretty well. They did pretty well out there. Consider that the resources that we enjoy today would not be there but for their stewardship. I say that we need to bring traditional thinking and stewardship back into the halls of the Federal Subsistence Board, and I would hope that you would agree with me on that one. I know that AFN has been working on a series of pilot projects to increase the influence of traditional knowledge in fish and game policies. I intend to bring all the stakeholders around the table to discuss these, to build on these. Let's unite around the principle that tribal participation in resource management is not a threat. It is an opportunity to make things better for all users of the resource. in our villages is another critical issue that we must address. And this summer, I worked to stake out new direction on public safety in our native villages. And this thinking is reflected in a revised vision of the Alaska's Safe Families and Villages Act that I co-sponsored along with Senator Begich, who you heard from yesterday. This bill firmly establishes the power of Alaska tribes to issue domestic violence protection orders to protect their people. And that is without regard to whether the offender is a tribal member, a native, or a non-native. The bill also recognizes the close and permanent working relationships among tribal, state, and federal governments, and these are key to any solution. Public safety is yet another area where the state can ill afford to treat Alaska tribes, our tribes, as adversaries. They must be treated as equal partners in a government-to-government relationship. And this bill provides federal incentives to bring the state and bring the tribes together. Now, another area of critical focus is ensuring the financial stability of tribal programs. You heard from Ed Thomas discussing this at length on Thursday. As the nation contends with its financial difficulties, we have to remain vigilant that the federal government honors its trust responsibility to our native people. It's not something that's nice to do. It is an obligation, and it must be honored. And no native community in this country has embraced self-determination and self-governance with the passion that we see in Alaska. And no native community works harder to ensure that the federal government fairly compensates the tribes for the programs and the services that our tribes deliver. This is the right fight for just the right reasons. So we must continue to focus on this. Ed Thomas also explained about how the corrosive effect of sequestration is impacting our Indian programs. And I know very well the hurt that our tribes have seen because of sequestration. I have never thought that this meat cleaver approach of sequestration was the right way to deal with our debt, and I think that the Congress needs to find a way to make smarter cuts, strategic reforms here. And because of our trust responsibility, I also think that the Indian Health Service should be shielded from these cuts in much the same way that we do already with Social Security, with Medicaid, and with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I'm going to be making this case to the Budget Conference Committee when I'm back in Washington when we resume next week. For this past several years, we have made good progress in funding important Indian programs. We need to continue positive momentum, positive progress moving forward. The recent government shutdown, the unfortunate government shutdown, reminds us that it is not only important that we adequately fund the Indian Health Service, but that the money arrives on time. And I've submitted legislation to ensure that IHS begins each fiscal year, with a full year's funding. We've done that for the VA, again, where we have a special relationship. We should be doing that also with the IHS. That's the right thing to do. Now, I've spent a few moments discussing some of the ways I'm working to implement your priorities. We're doing a lot, but there's more that must be done. And before I wrap up my remarks, I want to recognize we have two women who are with us this weekend, who have been instrumental through their support of two amazing men who helped not only build our state, but build amazing relationships between the 49th and the 50th state. Catherine Stevens and Irene Inouye are both with us this weekend as we will have an opportunity to pay tribute and honor to our dear Senator Stevens and to all the contributions that his friend, his brother, Senator Inouye has done. So I'd just like to recognize them briefly for a moment. I don't know if they're here in the hall, but I want to know. Oh, they're right here in front of me. It's an honor to have them with us. We deal with so many difficult issues. We deal with not only the personal and the internal struggles. We deal with the arguments, the fights that we have with our federal government. But really, if we are to have any chance of making progress on the truly difficult problems, whether it's suicide, whether it's violence, domestic violence, village sustainability, we can't push things under the rug. We can't kind of will them away. We have to talk about them. We have to address them up front and honestly and openly, even though it may be very difficult, it may be very painful, and it may require inner strength and courage that you didn't know was possible. And I think we saw that at this AFN yesterday with these young people from Tanana, who not only had the strength to speak out at the Youth and Elders, but who spoke out yesterday, sharing their fears, but with a courage for young people that you would not think possible, daring to face some of the things that we don't want to talk about. And so when our children come forward and ask for that help, take that courageous step, it requires all of us as leaders to recognize that courage, help them with their strength, and be leaders as well. We must strengthen our leadership to deal with them, and we must always be thinking of new ways to tackle the problems. And again, this brings me kind of full circle to where I started this conversation, and that's about leadership. The solutions to the problems that truly mean life or death for the future of our native culture, for the future of villages, and the future of traditional lifestyles, it's not going to come from Washington, D.C. These won't come from Juneau. The solutions need to start at the village level. They will start with you. They will start with you. And I have every confidence that you are up to the task. When I am out in the villages, no matter how small, or whether it's our state's largest village in Anchorage, I hear honest conversations about how we care for each other and how we treat one another. Honest conversations about life and leadership. And we know life is tough. It is horribly difficult, tough in some places. And the hardships are many. And it may often seem that the glass is more than half empty. But don't ever, ever forget that you have something going on in the village that so much of America has perhaps lost. You have community. And community provides the foundation for progress. So my part is to support the villages, reform public policy so that it works with you, not against you. Your part is to empower your leaders with support and good ideas, which we can work together to implement. And don't ever forget the well of potential leaders runs so far and so deep. Leadership can be found in nearly every aspect of traditional Native culture. It starts in the family. It's found in the fishing and the hunting and the whaling camps. It's found in the schools and in the tribal councils and all of our other great Native institutions. It's found in our patriotic Native veterans who defend our freedom. It's found in great educators like Tony Millot, who's recognized as your Citizen of the Year. It's found in our young women, the fact that Anna and Tara come before you as the new co-chairs, two women, young women leading this amazing organization. Honor the veterans, support the elders, grow your youth, because we recognize that they are truly the future. The heritage of this community is proud. Your culture is rich. The obstacles that you have overcome are great. And the contributions that you have made to this state are so very, very many. So never, never regard yourself as powerless. And if you start to doubt, I take you back to this very hall just 3 short years ago when you assembled, empowered me in a way to step forward and do what everybody on the outside said was impossible. But you said, we will stand with you, Lisa. And we did that. And you did it. You did that. You helped prove the power of the Native people. Now, I might need your help in the not too distant future, but we'll save that for another convention coming up. The power to make things better resides in each and every one of you, and the righteousness of your cause attracts allies across this great state. I intend to continue to travel throughout the villages of rural Alaska, to listen to your wisdom, to plan with you, to empower your ideas. This is my pledge and my promise to you, and I'm confident that working together, we will bring about that positive and that enduring change in harmony, in complete harmony with traditional Native values. I thank you. I love you. Anabasi.